You can't just like take a technology and put it into this one protocol and think that pharma is going to adopt it. I'm a big believer that you tech enable a service. 40 years ago, 7 to 14 years ago, drug approval. 40 years later, how many years? 7 to 14 years. Because I have the relationship with the patient, I'm going to find out every single time what went wrong. Technology's been around for 20 years plus, right? For 20 years, and it hasn't solved it yet. So the question is, what are we going to do differently? The biggest challenge, I think, really is the fear of change. 9 out of 10 drugs fail. That's terrible. The cure for cancer is already found. There's no chief pharmacy officer in any of the industries. I'm going to be the wall, right? We have one login for all our pharmacists. They log into me, and I give them the world.
Hi everyone, welcome to our new episode of Digital Health Interviews. And I'd like to remind you to subscribe to our channel. I think everyone who is interested in digital health, we have lots of really useful content. And especially today, for people who are closely related to clinical trials, patient recruitment, collaborating with pharma and CROs, this is a perfect episode for you. And we have a really special guest. I know him virtually for a while, but now finally I got a chance to meet him in person. So please meet Gerald Finken. Hi, Gerald.
Hi, it's good.
Really great to see you.
Yeah, likewise.
Let's start with your short.
You're taller than I thought.
That's good news. Let's start with a short introduction. Tell us about your career journey and I guess some of the main ventures you were involved in.
Sure. So back when I was a wee lad, I knew very early on I wanted to be in the healthcare profession, and fortunate enough to get into pharmacy school, became a pharmacist, and then fortunate right out of college got a job at Bristol Myers Squibb. Mm-hmm. And so right out of college I'm working as a pharmacist in the pharmaceutical industry, and started my career right off the bat by having an opportunity to work in the clinical supplies. And that became my expertise in clinical research and clinical trials. So I'm working there for 12 years. And then as life gets in the way sometimes, my wife got a teaching job out in Moorhead, Minnesota, by Fargo, North Dakota. And I had pretty much had it with corporate life at that point. You know, it was a point where it's like who you knew, not what you knew. And Squibb was a very small, dynamic company. Bristol Myers was more of an older, conservative company when they bought us. And I lasted about 2 years before then I said we left. So when I got out to Fargo, North Dakota, I realized how much I missed what I was doing. And so I started consulting, and one thing led to another. And I always tell everybody, with a Visa card and an $8,000 a month contract, I started a company called Clinical Supplies Management. And I worked on that, bootstrapped it for 20 years, and grew it to 2 locations, 150 employees, and realized that the only way to really become a cornerstone company in the packaging and labeling business to compete against the big, Fisher and Allmac and Catalent is I had to be in Europe. And so I brought in private equity, and immediately before the ink was dry on my deal, in my private equity deal, we already had our 2 tuck-in acquisitions in Europe. So overnight we became a cornerstone success in the packaging and labeling business. And then of course Clinigen bought us. So then I should be done, retired, and off into the sunset.
Why aren't you?
Yeah, good. My wife asked the same question. Why aren't you? Wasn't done yet. And I should back up a little bit and talk like entrepreneur and stuff. And in bootstrapping is much different than like the entrepreneurial VC world. It's totally different. But I had a taste of it when I was working at Bristol Myers Squibb. 2 friends of mine who were working for a company called PCI. They were a packaging and labeling company, still in existence in Philadelphia. And they had this idea that we would try to do packaging and labeling clinical supplies all by itself. Because at the time, clinical studies were starting to get pretty big. And we would go down to a company called Payco. We'd go into PCI, into their commercial operations to do packaging and labeling clinical supplies. But we always got bumped. It was a nightmare, but they were too big for us to do internally. Start to get in thousands of patients worth of clinical supplies. And so they had this idea, let's create a packaging and labeling facility dedicated to clinical supplies. And so I said, this sounds like a great idea, let's do it. And so for a year and a half, we worked on a venture plan and put together a business plan, and we got VC funded the VC fund called Northeast Pennsylvania, and NEPA was called. Fred Best, I'll never forget him. And so we got venture funded. So we got $1 million to open a facility in Allentown, Bethlehem. And I always say, we put it there because I put it there. I grew up in that area and said, this is where it's got to be. And demographics and everything else were really good for it. And so we bought a blister machine. I should back up a little bit. So we wrote the business plan. We go down to Philadelphia. We had Wolf Block Shores, a legal firm. We had Arthur Anderson as our accounting firm. I mean, this is a big deal, $1 million fund. And I got all the legal paperwork, went home, and never heard from my partners again. So guess who went into business without me? So I had my VC, so I got venture funded. But lesson learned, like partners, et cetera, really you have to know your partners. And you never, like it was a business decision, so it isn't like I had an axe to grind or anything like that, because after a few years it was like, it was business decision on their part. I was young. They thought I was young and inexperienced, where really they got rid of the wrong partner. But in any case, I say that because that was my first foray into business. And I didn't pursue it to be like a venture, as an entrepreneur. I just wanted to do it better. And great experience along the way. What I always tell everybody is that that company is now Fisher Scientific. Like Fisher, the biggest packaging labeling company, is centered the packaging labeling business in Allentown, Pennsylvania, because I put them there. Anyhow, so I'm back up then into CSM. And at CSM, when I was there, again, trying to improve processes. And so in clinical supplies, I realized the methodology we're using hasn't changed really in 40 years. So you talk about like digital, right, and what things are going, and the world had evolved. But what has happened in clinical supplies? It's done the same way it's been done for almost 40 years. And yet adapted by design trials came out. The IoT systems went crazy. They're trying to forecast and keep depots and, just-in-time supplies and stuff. So I was looking at all these things, there's got to be a better way. And as a pharmacist, I figured out a way that we could do it on demand. So you don't do any packaging labeling until you get a shipment request. Now, from a technology point of view, that's not so easily done, from the mentality point of view of like, how does this work logistically? And so as being innovative all the time, I was at CSM, and we also did something really very, very cutting edge, and that is we did telehealth services 20 years ago. We did telehealth services on the phone, not video, on the phone, talking to patients in clinical trials. And we're very, very successful at that. Really combining technology with service, the pharmacy services counseling, to deliver that service. First, it was under CSM. So anyhow, when that was all done, I decided I wasn't done yet, because there are problems in the industry today that has been in the industry for the longest that I remember. And everybody looks at, like, we could talk about decentralized clinical trials and patient enrollment and retention, recruitment. But if you stop and you go up to the higher levels, strategic levels, I always say, the one thing like no one talks about, but we have to talk about, is that 9 out of 10 drugs fail. That's terrible. Alex, that's terrible. Yet this is what we live with because everybody's making money, right? 7 to 14 years to get a drug approved. 40 years ago, 7 to 14 years to get a drug approved. 40 years later, how many years? 7 to 14 years. 40 years ago, my God, it cost $500 million to get a drug approved. Today, $1 billion to get a drug approved. Nothing's changed at the strategic level. And now we're down saying, well, let's look at why, right? We could look at patient recruitment's a problem. We can look at retention. And here we are today. So what did we do, right? Now we're getting into this topic. We started throwing technology at it. And you know what? I have gfinken@gmail.com because I was one of the first people with an email on Google. So I got my name. Because we were on Gmail when it just came out. And so 1997, right? Isn't that when the Google was available to all of us, right? That we go on. And so technology's been around for 20 years plus, right? For 20 years. And it hasn't solved it yet. So the question is, what are we going to do differently? Now we're going to say, let's apply AI. And I could go through the decades of like where we're going to go from a technology point of view, because I have to laugh because technology was a fax machine for me. It's huge. So I didn't have to walk across the campus at Bristol Myers Squibb to go from where I was in the A building to the back D building, which was a quarter-mile walk. So I could fax stuff over. Technology coming into the systems. And so as much as when you think about all the data we're collecting and everything we're doing from a technology point of view, I've seen it all. But now I think it's time we have to step back and really start taking a look at like the digital age and what is digital health, and everything now is wearables, and with again the data capability, analyzing it, big data, looking at AI, we can really start, accepting and having all that data. But even now, we've been at it a long time. And I go back to Watson, right here in Boston, right here. Watson was in Boston. What happened to them? Right? They're no longer in existence. And what were they trying to do? Big data. So, and that's in healthcare. And so here we are again today. So the sequence of events, I'm back into this yet. I'm not doing yet because I'm going to solve the recruitment problem. We're going to solve the dispensing clinical supplies problem that's still in existence. So I'm going to go beyond my on-demand concept. And there are certain things that I know that we can solve. But I'm turning it around a little bit, and I'm a big believer that you tech enable a service, right? And that you move it down that path and then get more efficient with technology. Then we can start taking a look at wearables and stuff, and I'm sure there's questions coming up that I have my own thoughts about wearables. But
well, first of all, quite a journey.
Thank you.
We're definitely going to talk about RxE2 more in a few minutes.
Yeah.
But I want to start the conversation with asking you to give some sort of like an overview of the current state of clinical trial space, because the pandemic came, lots of pharma CROs, they were forced to go virtual pretty fast. And now I feel like they don't think virtual is the best approach. They're more like hybrid and other things. And this term decentralized clinical trials had been super, like basically a buzzword for the space for the last 5 years. Again, lots of skepticism I hear from lots of people. So tell us what's happening, how the pandemic changed things, and where we're moving.
So the pandemic is as awful as it was, being a pharmacist, with friends in the front lines, and all the negative press about it and stuff, about vaccines and stuff, it's just awful. As I know so many people that died firsthand, friends of friends who died. And so as awful as it was, it really did push to the forefront the Science 37s, the Medibles, and their technology. Now granted, it happened so fast, they weren't ready. And everybody talks about their platforms that weren't quite ready and stuff. And so everybody is forced to do it. And forced to doing it, there's Herculean efforts done by so many people, but that's, as we know, it burned everybody out too. And then when the pandemic ended and we were looking at the decentralized clinical trials, and I use that term, and I'll keep using decentralized clinical trials because it's a term we use, and everybody says, oh, DCTs are done, and I forget what hype curve that is that they talk about and stuff, and we're following that path. But based upon what I'm seeing with RxE2 and where we're going, it's here and it's here to stay. And the 40-year problem that I talk about, if we do not go to a decentralized hybrid model, if we don't use, and to me, an entirely different model to close out the studies, companies will still make money. Pharma will still be around. We'll still find ways to do this. And but the promise of what technology can do won't be realized for decades to come, when it could be recognized in a decade. I'm a big believer that's absolutely the way we have to go. And I'm a big believer we've got to stop this nonsense of clinical trials over here, healthcare over here. And we've got to get regulatory bodies rethinking about data collection and how we can collect data now. As I'll talk a little about RxE2, I think one of the biggest issues we don't have pharmacist involvement. There's no chief pharmacy officer in any of the industries, right? You have a chief medical officer. So many things when you think about recruitment, compliance, adherence, and retention, what profession, licensed professional is responsible for those? Pharmacists. And they're not involved in clinical research. I mean, I'm a pharmacist involved in clinical research, but I didn't have my pharmacy operations, right? I don't go in, I have a director of pharmacy operations who, when I go in, I start talking about what we can do in pharmacy. I don't have to tell them what pharmacists do. I don't have to try to explain that we're more than just dispensing. They would know already. Just like you go to a chief medical officer, they know the medical profession. We don't have to explain it. I think for me, the biggest thing is what's upon us, how technology has transformed the industry, and we have this tidal wave coming at us that we're not ready for. Right? And we know this is in drug development. I just met Carl June 2 days ago, person to person, in a birthday party for somebody. Right? The CAR T therapy, unbelievable. And you think about where that started 10 years ago with the cytokine storm, and you kind of died before you come back. No more cytokine storms. Technology has advanced us so far down the path of like modeling. Side effects are going to be a thing of the past. But the issue is like we're not going to have drugs for millions of patients. We're going to have drugs for 10,000 here, change the therapy a little bit for 10,000 here because of the modeling. But once you get done with the drug, the development of the drug, and you know this drug will work with minimum side effects, there's no way to move it through this dinosaur, through the second phase of this. And to move it further, the only way that is going to happen is two things. You have to, in my mind, be like the virtual hybrid, right? That you have to put into the commercial setting with again, a lot of changes, a lot of concept changes, regulatory changes, the way we think about things. And the only way you're going to do that is with the support of technology, tech-enabled services, tech enabling the pharmacist, the doctor, the nurses, the phlebotomists, the FDA, everybody to move further and faster.
It's interesting to know, again, your opinion, because the pandemic forced pharma companies to sort of change their approach pretty fast. Do you think, because there's a stereotype that pharma is super slow in adopting technology and all that stuff, do you think now actually you see the change and pharma companies are ready to accept more and more innovation in their daily practice?
Well, I think this is a rebound effect, right? And everybody gets back to, let's get back to like what we know best, right? Clayton Christian sustaining innovation, right? It's incremental, right? Large corporations can't innovate, just not the way it happens. Versus like us, we pivot every week. We make changes. I think they're absolutely open to innovation. I mean, I was at a conference today where they had about innovation. The innovation officers there, totally open to it. But this is where, like, as a small company, we think, as a startup, you had this innovation. Why aren't you accepting it? We're not putting ourselves in their shoes. It's kind of like putting yourselves in the shoes of the patient. Right? They have like KPI. They need milestones. They have a huge organization. You can't just like take a technology and put it into this one protocol and think that pharma's going to adopt this, because they have procedures and processes and the data, the way they collect, and the vendors that they've had to vet and do quality assurance on, and so it's I think it'll be a stepwise approach. So I think they're very open to innovation, but we as smaller companies, the innovators, have got to get realistic about, put ourselves in their shoes, and where's the KPIs? Perfect example, we were at a conference a month ago. Some of my people were at a conference a month ago. There were, I think, 40 companies doing recruiting. None of us have KPIs. None of us. We all say we can all pitch, right, with the best of them. And that's why I think what's unique about us is that we have something very unique beyond technology. We have service and technology that, for me, I'm moving further down the funnel. Like I have KPIs for the top of funnel, like a lot of people do. But the pharma's not going to accept this, right? They're not going to get caught in the pitch. They get 100 of them a week, So it's really going to be about, we have to do a better job of fulfilling our pitch, getting the KPIs, proving what we're doing, and as you know, maybe be a little bit more prudent with our VC dollars, right? To making sure that the VC dollars aren't going all to marketing. Companies are out there spending $25,000 a month on fierce biotech. That money should have been spent maybe towards your technology or really enabling the services and taking it further so you can get the KPIs they're looking for. Which to them, they're so inundated, like with recruitment companies and the technology, and we could talk about wearables and stuff. You got to get, like, they're sick of it. It's like, no, I want a recruited patient. That's going to be the measuring stick. But then they're their own worst enemy. Take a look at their inclusion-exclusion criteria. So let's give data to say, listen, if you open up the age a little bit, you let them have this one drug a little bit longer, that's the data we have, and we can show them that their protocol's not going to suffer, but I can give them 50 more patients than I could yesterday. I can give them 500 more patients across the country, that if they open it up. And then to prove to them that those patients aren't going to hurt their data. The end result, being able to then file and get a drug approved.
I think now is a perfect time for you to tell us more about RxE2 and what exactly you're doing.
So RxE2 really is based on the premise of getting pharmacists involved in clinical trials.
How?
Through recruitment services to start. So it's a slow walk. So I want pharmacists to be PIs. But there's no way, again, there's no way I can go to a pharma company and said, let my pharmacists be PIs. Principal investigators, right? It's just not going to happen. So we laid out a business plan to say, listen, what's the low-hanging fruit? What are the problems? Recruitment. Our pharmacists have, right next door to the clinic that has patients, We have 10 pharmacies around that clinic with patients with the same indication, but this clinic has nothing to do with them. They don't know those patients. So we said, listen, we think that we can find the same criteria you use in your clinic. We can use the same data, relationships, et cetera, to get those same, 10 times the amount of patients into that one clinic. And so as a start. So we know the pharmacist is one of the best healthcare professionals in the community. We know patients are in a pharmacy 30 times a year, but like there are other healthcare providers, right? The PCP, the nurse, the phlebotomist, but you don't see them 30 times a year, right? Pharmacists have a totally different interaction with patients than a doctor-patient. Again, that 1 time, 2 times, or if it is 12 times a year, then you have serious problems. But then if you're seeing a doctor 12 times a year, you're seeing me 50 times a year as a pharmacist. So the idea is let's bring a healthcare profession that can really make a difference. And it all stemmed from when we were doing the counseling services 20 years ago. We knew for the first time real world, like real world evidence, real world data, but I want to be careful about those terms. We knew what was going on in the real world with the clinical drug trial, with the drug. What was really happening. They would tell the physician, the PI, one thing, and they'd tell us something totally different. We knew they weren't taking the medications the way they were supposed to. We knew they were taking other medications they weren't supposed to. We knew they weren't taking the medication. They'd tell us. And so with that, then we could real-time fix it, real-time feedback. We could tell them which clinical site. The study coordinator was just terrible. Just nobody wanted to go to him. But who's going to tell the doctor that? No, but the study coordinator, they told us. So you go to the center and say, listen, you really need to change that study coordinator. Or the same thing, we had a clinical site, and we'd be talking to the patients, and what we're hearing, we'd start saying, listen, you need to audit this site. Really, you need to audit. Finally, when they did it, they shut it down and lost all 12 patients that they had, right? Because of lack of quality. And this is what we were learning. So real time, we learned what was going on, and we knew the value. The industry just saw it as an extra expense. Wait, I'm paying the study coordinator to do counseling. First of all, they're not licensed to do it, right? So they could do, that's a different story. We can go down the legality of this regulatory piece. This is what we do as pharmacists. If there was a chief pharmacy officer, we'd be doing this 20 years ago, and we'd get 3 more drugs approved out of the 10. I guarantee 1 more out of the 10. Because I know it isn't that the study's failing, the drug is failing the study. I know that the study fails the drug many times. And we proved it. So that passion was what's driving RxE2 and pharmacists. But I knew it wasn't scalable, right? To counsel like that, I'd have to have 1,000 pharmacies for 1,000 trials, or it's like, and it's actually a third. I need 3 pharmacists for every company that's out there, Anyhow, that's when technology comes in. So we partnered, merged with a company called Habit2 out of Israel, and they had a platform, a patient app, right in line with everything we were doing, the technology to allow us to scale. And of course, then from there, we built a platform about how do we work with the independent community pharmacies. And I should have mentioned that. We're not working with the retail chains, the big box stores. We're working with the independent community pharmacists, which there's 20,000 across the US versus like 9,000 for CVS and 4,000 for Rite Aid. So our independent stores equals Rite Aid, Walgreens, Walgreens, CVS, and Rite Aid combined is what the independents equal. And so we said we want to tap into that because we know the relationship those pharmacists have with their patients. And so we went down that path and said, okay, we know that recruitment's a big piece of what's needed. I knew the investigational drug still becomes a real problem. So anything that was creative, innovative, and clinical has been squashed by data collection and clinical supplies, the cost. So when we talk about COVID and we talk about direct-to-patient, you know what kills that process? $18,000 per shipment per patient. You take a $2 million clinical supplies budget and now you make it $20 million, and that study comes to an end pretty quickly. So when I think about these things, I said these are 2 things pharmacists can impact today. The next thing is we're going to add counseling. And now it's a progression. People are starting to realize we really can impact adherence and compliance right now. And then retention is absolutely, you have a relationship with your pharmacist, you stay on the study for your pharmacist because every day you can talk to that pharmacist. And so we're moving down the path to the pharmacist being the PI. And more, like when we start thinking about like COVID, if more and more pharmacists were PIs, we could have gotten those studies done so much more quickly, so much more efficiently. And if you know what COVID, who inoculated the world but pharmacists? It wasn't, the clinics were all shut down. I mean, and when you think about it was really the independent pharmacists going into the chain pharmacies here in the U.S. because the chain pharmacist was busy filling prescriptions that went in and inoculated, everybody in the U.S. And the same thing in Europe. It was the pharmacies that came forward to inoculate everybody. So pharmacists played a huge role in COVID, and they knew it. Now it's time for the industry to understand what pharmacists do. It's time for chief pharmacy officer at every pharmaceutical company, and then we wouldn't be having this conversation. It'd be known. You wouldn't be asking what does RxE2 do. We just do what everybody else does.
So you start with, you said, with patient recruitment and dispensing.
Yes.
But if I hear correctly, you're planning to expand and try to improve adherence and all that stuff. That means the end goal, like how do you see the product, I don't know, in 5 years? You want the whole trial to be happening on the platform or no?
Yes, specific types of trials. Vaccine trials, right? Those trials that are better suited for the pharmacy. Because if you think about it, operationally, pharmacies are much more efficient than the clinic. So go get a vaccine at your clinic, and I don't mean a minute clinic, I mean actually your doctor's, if you can even get in to see your doctor, get a vaccine, and go to a pharmacy. When I go get my vaccines, I'm scheduled at 9:15. Guess what? I'm getting vaccinated at 9:15, right? And everything's in 2-minute increments. Everything's very precise, accurate. And I believe that there's so much that we could do in clinical trials to be that much more operationally efficient. The key part of this is you got to have the technology, you got to have the platform to work from. We're in a territory that, and I forget what ocean they call it, no, the blue ocean, that's a different term. We're in unmarked territory. Pharmacists have never been involved. So we're coming with the first platform for pharmacists. So clinical sites, all the time they talk about, like today I heard in the conference, right, they had 20 iPads. There's 50 different logins for all the different studies. I'm going to be the wall, right? We have one login for all our pharmacists. They log into me and I give them the world. It's kind of like when I'm in Fargo, North Dakota. At 15 minutes, I'm at the airport, 15 minutes, I'm on my plane through TSA and everything, And then I go to Minneapolis and then I have access to the world. So I'm doing the same thing. I'm going to be the Fargo airport. We're going to have the one login for all pharmacists. And then all the nonsense, all the tech, when you start thinking about wearables and everything is going to come through us through one platform. That's my vision. Now there'll be competition in time, but it'll be a decade before there's another company. It'll be, the second company might come on board. But even then, the question is like what pharmacist is going to go over and want 2 logins when this one is paying me and I'm doing just fine? And so the idea is to simplify because it's an area no one's been into. So we have a sandbox that's just open to us. I mean, it's people. So, it's from a technology point of view, is how can you create, working with patients, pharmacists, the pharmaceutical industry, decentralized clinical trial, those who provide the DCT services. And we have an opportunity to build our platform from scratch, Part 11 compliant, HIPAA compliant, GDPR compliant, ISO compliant, from the ground floor up, making it so that pharmacists can have access to the world in clinical trials. And you have to understand, you're not going to do, like if you're going to do an implant and a surgery, that's not happening in a pharmacy. The COVID, I'm sorry, the CAR T, those, like you're getting those injections, you're doing that at a full-on hospital because of the side effects, et cetera. So none of those trials can be done in pharmacy, but there's so many of them we can. Anything in obesity, hypertension, diabetes, all those types of vaccine studies, they could all be done at the pharmacy. Much more efficient, much more cost effective.
So the startup itself, it's usually some sort of innovation. It can be technical innovation, it can be business innovation. In your case, you're innovating the approach, getting pharmacists involved in the process. What's the reaction from pharma companies, CROs, when you tell them, like, yeah, we are completely disrupting the approach of the clinical trial?
So back to COVID, wouldn't happen. If COVID didn't happen and pharmacists didn't inoculate the world, right, the Walgreens and the CVS's and Walmart, if they didn't do what they do, we wouldn't be here. Then, as we launch our company, because we were doing this, for 4 years now as RxE2, and almost 5 now, and we launched this, and shortly thereafter, CVS announced they're getting into this. Shortly after that, Walgreens announced they're getting into this, and then Walmart gets into it. So now, pharma, like I don't have to break down that barrier. I talk pharmacists, they want to listen. Now, I don't have the clout, I'm not the billion-dollar company, but we also know billion-dollar companies move slow, and where we pivot and move. So breaking down that barrier is no longer an issue. Everybody wants to talk to us. When I talk about recruitment, everybody wants to talk to us. Then it's about how we go about it. And so that's where the rubber starts meeting the road about what's next.
That sounds amazing. But my question is, can you back up your words with some data? Like, for example, let's take recruitment as an example. With your solution and with pharmacists involved, the recruitment process for a specific clinical trial takes, I know, I'm making this up, but 40% faster. Or can you back up with some real life data that it's working?
No, because I'm not going to pitch it. This is not a pitch, right? This is reality, and we have to stop pitching, right, in this recruitment world, and so we had to take a step back. We're in the rural world, and I thought for sure, if you think about, like I said, you have the doctor and their patients, and they get into the trial because there's a relationship. Our pharmacists have the exact same relationship with the exact same type of patient. They just don't have a relationship with the doctor. So I had 10 pharmacies around a clinic, usually about 10 pharmacies, independent community stores around any one of the current clinical sites. And logically, and everything I knew about pharmacy and pharmacists, I thought we were done. I thought we were going to be off to the races just like that. Not so fast. So the top of the funnel, I have all these great patients. I have the relationship. I have patients motivated to get into the trial. I can go through the early screening to make sure they have the disease. They're not on the drugs they are not on drugs they're not supposed to be on, and on drugs they're supposed to be on. I can bring them down the funnel pretty far, and then it falls apart because every site is different. Every company is different, and you would think that when we first found out, we started referring patients in our first pilot studies. We were referring patients, highly qualified patients. Nobody's getting consented or randomized. So guess what we can do? We started going to the patient because they're in the pharmacy the next day and said, "What happened?" "Oh, they never called me." "What? The site never called you?" Nope, I'm still waiting. "I'm not interested anymore." And everybody knows if you don't take the patient through the funnel and consent them, right, there's 50-50 chance. And that's where we are right now, 50-50. But we're not done yet. And so I'm in this to solve the recruitment problem, not just pitch and, come in and give the next, going to give you the data of the study that was where you get free colonoscopies. Everybody's going to be, that's an easily recruited study. We're talking about MDD studies. We're talking about real phase 2, phase 3 studies where we're coming into rescue sometimes. And we don't have the data yet, but we keep moving down the funnel. Because I have the relationship with the patient, I'm going to find out every single time what went wrong. And I can tell you right now, 50% of the patients I refer are lost to contact, one way or another. Site didn't call them, they decided not to move further, and a lot of this is all time sensitive. So we're closing that gap. Because I have the data at the end, again, collecting data, we're running algorithms. We're using ChatGPT to start questioning the data we have to say, where can we get better at this? And we will get further and further down that funnel to the point of where I know for a fact, like I was mentioning, our pharmacists, I just spoke to pharmacists this past week, they know they can do a lot more at the pharmacy. So we're getting pulled down the funnel, right down, like I thought, where I want to go to the pharmacists doing more and more. It's happening just the way we said it would. The pharmacists are going to be, there's such a skill set that they're going to solve the problem further down that we're going to be asked to keep doing more and more. Because pharma wants those patients. And I know we're losing those patients because of the relationship, the outside and sites, all the financial difficulties, all the complexities within sites. They're not our patients. We use a different recruitment firm. They're not really part of the clinic. So it's a mishmash of communications where we are right now, but that's all solvable. And so, yes, we're stepwise approach is how we're going to get there, and I still think it's the best approach.
You already have some pilots with some big names in the market.
Yes.
What was their response after the pilot?
Disappointment. Same thing. They thought we were going to, get randomized patients, and in the end, we didn't. And some of that has to do with, again, really tough inclusion/exclusion criteria. But no one said no more. Right? To me, the only way this is going to work is true partnerships, and that is being totally open. We're failing. This isn't working. And because it's like if we don't tell pharma where we're failing, we're taking decisions away from them. They may have other information that we don't even know about, which is why it's happening. And so together, if we both look at it and say, let's solve the recruitment problem and stop with this like, this is my data and this is my information and have this other company and everybody's pitching one another, we're going nowhere. So I want to say every one of our clients, I don't think anyone's closed the door on us. And we were straightforward all along about what we could and couldn't do. And we didn't deliver as promised, and we're getting better at that. But as we solve it, like I said, give us another year, and we'll have some like MDD and other things. We'll get a much better result than, or the equivalent result of what the clinics are getting. Clinics get 60% of the patients. We need to close the gap, and it's in that gap is where we're working. And so, and I, again, give us a year.
All right.
Interview me in a year and I'll give you the new KPIs.
Yes, I was going to say, let's talk in a year and we'll see what happens. Just sort of abstracting from this specific industry, but looking at the startup itself, what do you think is, for you personally as a founder, is the most difficult thing? To build a team, to build a tech, to find partnerships? What's for you as a startup founder is the most complicated thing that you think is like the hardest part?
It's like my superpower, like they use that term, so my superpower is the vision. Right? And I've had this vision, I see it so clearly how it's going to work. It like challenges me to move further. And I've just been so fortunate to hire just really good people. Really good people to deliver. And like my chief pharmacy officer, she did the work for me 20 years ago. She's the world expert in this, and she's on my team. My technology group, cutting edge about where they're going with like the patient app that we have that's coming. Again, that's even after, right? The patient app that's coming, but our platform is second to none because of the experience and the knowledge of our technology team and the vision that they have. So for me, the hardest thing. I think the hardest thing for me, like as you mentioned earlier about innovation. Everybody talks a good game, but no one really wants it. And that back to Clayton Christensen sustaining innovation. What's the roof overhead? What puts food on the table? And I don't want to innovate because that could change. And so the fear of like robots taking over everything, ChatGPT, AI taking all our jobs. I had a joke kind of today where I said that the panelist they asked the panelists a question, and if I was fast enough, I wanted to do it on ChatGPT. And I would say, now you can't answer any of these, right? You can't give one of the answers to ChatGPT because that's just all common knowledge, right? You have to answer what ChatGPT didn't, or tell me what it meant. And that's really where we're going with this. So we're going to use AI for everything to really get this in, but then use the pharmacist, use the doctor, use the nurse. What does it mean? Where do we go? So the biggest challenge, I think, really is the fear of change. And if we just didn't have that fear, as we all have that innate, and we could all get into psychology and Kahneman and all this stuff, and behavioral aspects, if we could just get over that and just move forward, and again, something even with like the patient in mind, but then, well, again, anyhow, so I think that's the most frustrating part for me and most difficult.
Let's finish this interview on some piece of optimism. Give us, what do you expect and why are you so optimistic that you can actually improve something in this space?
We already are. Pharmacists, we have 400 pharmacists on our platform today working away, right? So they're already now, we have pharmacists involved in clinical trials. So it's launched. And now that's happened, they're never going back. They love what they're doing. The optimism in the space, as I mentioned before, the cure for cancer is already found. The cure for the diseases, they're already found. How do we bring them to market? And I want to say, like anything, when they're there, like the Sarepta Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, right? They got that drug approved on 12 patients. There's going to be a lot more of those coming down the pike. Because, and I'll take it back even further. I don't know if you remember, but I was living in the AIDS epidemic, or the AIDS pandemic, or epidemic. And I had friends that passed away. It was just awful. And they talk about a motivated group to find solutions, right? And I think that's just humankind. that we will find solutions. And so when we have loved ones, even like all the different advocacy groups that are out there, they'll find ways. If they know that drug is sitting in the possibilities, they'll go get it. They'll find ways. It's just human nature. And so if, pharma might look different, but I'm really optimistic about what's happening on the front end of discovery in pharma. It's already there. And once like the right CEO comes along to tear down the walls to let that through, let their 100 compounds through, figure out a way to get it through, FDA coming on board. So I'm optimistic about really where this is going to go, because that flood is coming. And it's like, where do you want to be?
I love it. Finally, your last piece of advice to startup founders, well, in your case, that are in clinical trial space.
I love the great pitch. Back it up. Put your money where your mouth is first. Like, you put your money in, go do your pilots, and then come out and raise money, is how I'd say. It's everybody wants to get in, for the pitch. And in the startup company, that first VC that I did, we brought our own salaries in for the first year. So I was fortunate enough to be in a place where I was fortunate with real estate and stuff, and so I put my money where my mouth is. And to come in, bootstrapping with the pilots. So when you start to pitch, you can back it up with data and not just hype.
Great. Thank you, Gerald.
You're welcome.